Okay, I think we are on this time after our disastrous misfire last week, where try as I might, and even though I was on the air, sort of, kind of, for a while, it never ended up getting posted on YouTube. Boo hoo, boo hoo, boo hoo. So there is our opening little logo, and we will proceed accordingly. So, specs I've been able to kind of update to add on some additional material on last week because I just got to see James Tour's response to Gutsick Gibbon and Company, and I'll put a little blurb about that and apprise Dan Stern Cardinale and Erica of the consequences there. That's quite some. Hello, Lisa. Yes, I'm on screen this time. Yay! And as of course, we are ongoing the exciting world of Titans, the effervescent piece of pseudoscience claptrap that is Sarfati and Tay on dinosaurs. And this is a Luskin week, or last week was a Luskin week. So it's going to be this week again, where we're going to continue our process of examinings on that. So we will start right off the bat with giving us the basics of what has been the next section of Sarfati and Tay. And this one relates to some more out of sequence stuff because along the way they've had footnotes that are at the end of the book that refer to things in little boxes that are earlier in the book. And I suspect this is about stuff that was kind of added in last minute so that they end up putting the source material at the end. Well, I'm going after each footnote in the order that they are in the book, not how they end up in the background. So suddenly I'm jumping to a section towards the tail end. This one relates to some Psittacosauruses, or is it Psittacosaurusi? Little itty bitty critters, well, not little itty bitty, dinosaur standards, yes. Think about the size maybe of a collie, that are the ancestral groups of the protoceratopsids that are in turn the ancestral groups for the ceratopsids like your famous Triceratops. Anyway, they're not given any information like that. And of course, we've alluded to that when we covered the subject earlier in the book. But point is that they're going in about trying to marshal flood evidence again. And a lot of this is actually reprising material that was earlier in the book. So they're not actually adding necessarily new sources. Anyway, what really piqued my curiosity had to do with this flood deposit that, in their own words, describes in a small area, as in like half a square meter. I mean, this is just not ginormous. It's roughly the size of like maybe your kitchen bathroom bath mat or kitchen rug. Not exactly spectacular. Anyway, there are apparently a jumble of often articulated skeletons of these little Psittacosauruses all jumbled together. So they're suspecting that they're kind of juveniles. And the material kind of supported that. And what's interesting is that the mush of material in Sarfati and Tay are colliding stuff that's actually about different things, but you'd only discover that if you bothered to read the papers. So we've got a thing from 2004, Meng et al., which is the original preliminary study. It's a short thing from Science Magazine or Nature. I can't remember which one which. And so I'll be able to put the link up that for you'll be able to follow up suit. And then another paper from Zhao et al. 2013, also open access. So I'll be putting a link up to that, which when you looked in that one, it's about a completely different deposit. And although they are alluding to the earlier work from 2004. So right off the bat, we got what amounts to a trifecta. Yes, he sounds familiar. Yeah. A trifecta of that it's not a very big site. It's not some catastrophic mass graveyard that covers the size of a football field or something like that. Although on planet-wide scale, even that can be quite small and perfectly in tune with the things that you could have in a non-flood geology catastrophe. And the second thing, of course, is the fact that the psittacosaurids are on the evolutionary line to ceratopsids. So they are a whole hidden area in terms of the baraminology. And then third is that the papers are not all that recent. 2004 is 20 years ago. 2013 is a dozen years ago. So, wow, you think maybe there's been some work since then. So that means, ooh, I think I should look into that. So, right after that, 2014, there was a paper from Hedrick et al. Alas, I don't have the full text available for you, but the extended abstract version at Science Direct is, so I'll be putting the link on to that one. And it was about the geological context of the area, and that it relates to volcanic activity and pyroclastic flows and a whole bunch of fun stuff on that. Now, we press on farther down into our recent times, and things are much more intriguing even than that. So we got a 2021 paper by Zhang et al., which is refining the dating range for the volcanic parts and the lake features in there down to about a 1.6 million year window. We're all talking Cretaceous here, I think. And then for a final wrinkle, there's a fairly new paper from McLennan et al. From PNAS that suggests that some of the fossils aren't actually in a context of pyroclastic flows, but they're because of collapsed burrows rather than just merely volcanism. And so all of which is absolutely delightful material, but it's not big slosh in any case. So the science has moved on. And indeed, certainly the 2014 paper and the 2021 maybe as well would have been recent enough or current enough that Sarfati and Tay might theoretically have been referring to them. But as we know, they're not exactly jumping through hoops for the methodical nature of their research. They are simply retreading the tropes and bringing them what they can when they want to, but largely material that they've already been bumping into from prior apologetics. So it's pretty boring. Before I get to the Luskin file, then let me give you a reaction to the stupid tour thing. For those unaware of all of this, James Tour has been bumping into a bunch of young Earth creationist worldview people who are not always upfront about their young Earth creationism. Tour himself is adamant that he is not a young Earth creationist, and yet he's perfectly capable of thinking that, you should go to a No Kings protest. No, although there was a great big one in Spokane. And in fact, we're one of those little spots that have had like some tear gas and miscellaneous things. It's all downtown. I've been busy working on the book, and so I've eschewed that. But yeah, there's quite a goodly number of people, and particularly because we have some ICE operations going on to where there are actually people involved who are wanting to stop that. And I would contend for perfectly valid reasons. I'm an open immigration person that for all practical purposes, if somebody wants to come here and be peaceable, fine and dandy, make them legal, which is the way we handled it for most of our immigration through most of our country. And we were putting restrictions on the Chinese back in the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 1880s. We often went through xenophobic periods when we were curtailing our open immigration policies. No coincidence. This has never helped the economy. We had a curtailing of our immigration policy that greased the skids for the Great Depression in the 1930s. We had expulsion of Mexican laborers in the 1930s, didn't get us out of the Depression any better. And we had it again in the 1950s under Eisenhower, and that's also a time of the Eisenhower recession. Are we getting a pattern here that this is bad economic policy? So, yeah. Anyway, apart from a few, I think there were like 20 or 30 arrests downtown from some people who were getting in the way of the police. And we've even made the national news occasionally. Oh, la-di-da. At any rate, things are going to continue to be murky for some time to come until things get even more murky once the economic props start falling apart and all the dire effects of all of this stuff, let alone what is going on with Iran and Israel and whether or not we're going to be sucked into a thing like that, or whether little taco president will be trying to avoid any problems because he likes cute military parades, but doesn't necessarily want to play the big cards. And of course, we have our Secretary of Defense Hegseth, who's this crazy person. So this is exciting times to live in, isn't it, kids? Anyway, back on to our little bit about Tour and Stadler. Erica and Dan Stern Cardinale and Dave Farina had done a very extensive breakdown of what they found problematic about Tour's little chit chat with Stadler. And of course, Tour and Stadler have replied in an hour and 40-minute declaration, which basically reprises their talking points. They're not really bringing up any new source material. It's a funky little thing to deal with. But I was amused by when they start bumping into some of the issues with humans and also some of the source material things with the methodology of how you determine common ancestry. And so the reaction bits that we'll see whether Dan or Erica or Dave decide to respond to this thing, and they have their own little bits. But I would recommend that there are some big deal points that Stadler is relying on, because basically he's just reprising his stuff, and Tour is sitting there like a potted plant through most of it, nodding his head and going, "Oh, I didn't know about that," because he's clearly not read any of the papers or anything that Stadler brought up. So he's uninformed on the subject and probably unlikely to become any more informed. But along the way, in trying to reject the 2016 paper on Baum et al., which was testing primate ancestry, Stadler was really going on and on about the assumption and the straw manning that they were doing. And he particularly lit into a quote: "We assume that each family ancestor at its origin acquired character states at each character independently of all the other family ancestors." In other words, the papers method was to give the broadest benefit of the doubt in terms of constructing this phylogenetic test and genetic test, so that they would be assuming that all of the character states would be developing independently, rather than that any of them would be coming in blocks and stuff already, which could disguise the measurement that they were trying to do. Well, that didn't set well at all with Stadler, and he regards that as their Achilles heel and their straw man. And so he then went on to offer what he thought would be a proper analysis, and that came from a little fellow, Winston Awert, a 2018 paper that he was doing on analysis and clustered units. And so that was an interesting little measure, that Awert's paper, which is just crap. That's in Biocomplexity, by the way, which would be an intelligent design journal. So we see this cross-fertilization that's going on in that anti-evolution subculture. So I would recommend that Dan or Erica or anybody else that decides to weigh in on this subject hone in on those issues of methodology and analytical bits as the most interesting elements to deal with on it. I'll be following suit on it because it is, after all, a topic that's going to come up with the Human Evolution chapter that I'm continuing, that I'll be working on with Jackson for Rocks for their Volume 2. And it's going to be fun and games. Really neat. I finished up all my anthropic section for the book, so all the fine-tuning stuff is tidied up. Put in the material on the Oklo reactor, the ancient multi-billion-year-old thing that relates to the fine structure constant. And there's a whole bunch of little archaeological, paleontological issues that are sidebars to this that bring in Gunter Beckley, of all people. There's a lot of fun connections that are going on in there. And then I've just been now finishing up the Pioneer Anomaly, which relates to quibbles about Einstein and modified gravitational theories, and a smattering of creationists have weighed in on this over the years, largely quite a while ago. We really don't have a heck of a lot on it new from them in the last 15 years or so. It's about this issue about the Pioneer probes seemingly were slowing down a little more than a relativity theory and the like would be suggesting. And it turns out has a fascinating prosaic issue that it's about the amount of heat generated from the probe and how it was kind of acting as a brake. And then there's other little sidebar issues about even a possible venting of some of its propellant that was leaky enough that added in. Because we're talking about forces that are like a billionth of the gravity on the Earth's surface. So it's really tiny little numbers where they're trying to adjust back and forth on this. Anyway, that's going to be a little subsection. And once all that's done, then it's over with a vengeance to the day 4 discussion. That a thing that I just came up with that I think was rather fun is young Earth creationists, of course, have their own problems with day 4 because the sun and moon and the stars are being made on day 4 and therefore after the Earth and plants, which is completely cockamamie in terms of sequence. Old Earth creationists theoretically can accept the big time frame element, but they still have to deal with, are the days useful at all? And so is there any attempt to from that branch to provide a kind of chronology of what the days supposedly mean? And it turns out really few even try to this. Ross has bumped into it a little bit at Reasons to Believe, and we got a thing from Kenneth Poppy and another one from the Kabbalistic physicist Gerald Schroeder, and then this fellow from the 1980s, Newman, that had something very vague. And when you try to put together all of their material, you realize there's absolutely no unanimity. They're just flailing all over the place, and they're still dodging that bloody day 4 issue with rationalizations about whether the atmosphere was transparent or not, and therefore you wouldn't have seen the stars. And it's really strange. Ross and company, Zwerig and that, is still pushing this at Reasons to Believe. So anyway, that's a little sidebar on it. So we can now move on to part 2 and the Luskin file. Luskin, as you know, or the list that was compiled, Klinghoffer and several people have put together this little shtick. We're a little over 100 into it, and presumably they claim that it's over 800 things. We'll find out exactly because they never have any compiled spreadsheet, but I'll know that exactly. So there's a bunch of topics that then bring up material that then lead to other things. And often it's the case that some more of the papers are also on their list, but others aren't. And that's kind of revealing up and down the road, as you've been seeing in previous episodes. So we start off with the 2021 paper from Schaffer and Lebanon. Again, we only have the abstract available for you this time. Fortunately, we'll be able to end run that with the ones that we have full text that you can follow up as well. Anyway, this paper indicated in the abstract that, quote, despite the radical increase in ADAR targets brought on by the introduction of ALU elements, the few evolutionarily conserved editing sites managed to retain their editing levels. Here we review and discuss the cost of having an unusual amount of double-stranded RNA and editing in the transcriptome, as well as the opportunities it presents, which possibly contributed to accelerating primate evolution. So right off the bat, this is relating to primate evolution, which means human evolution, and the whole issue about to what extent up or down aspects of ALU abundance in our genome had an effect on this stuff. Perfectly fine little topic. We've been bumping into it over and over again, and with the other papers going on here. So 2 of them related to, when I was doing feedback on finding out what this issue was about this ADAR targeting and bits from A to I kinds of things in the genome. 2 of the ones turned out to pop up also on the Luskin list. So clearly they were drawing on this. And this was older material from 2014. So both of them by Bazek et al. When you look at those papers, what's interesting is the stuff right off the bat. They're talking about like 100 million potential sites that they're looking at. That high number really must have attracted them like bears to honey. But it's, if they were thinking that meant that there were 100 million functional examples, no, not quite. Because this is just about how many of them might be getting edited. And there was a relatively low expression rate on those where they're indicating like it was below 1%. So something else more is going on here, which leads to the paper not on the list. A more recent one, Yuan et al. 2023, although 2023 is recent enough that, or far enough back that it theoretically could have been on their list. It's on the biological roles of that editing process specifically, which, first of all, apparently is irreversible. So the editing system, once it does its editing job, boop, that's it, that's settled. So it's a thing that the editing system obviously needs to be very, very careful about not getting rid of something that shouldn't be there, which would possibly have some downsides. Remember, we've been commenting so much about how the presence of all of these ALUs has to be dealt with in the genome. And they need to be edited out for introns. They need to be adjusted in the case of them actually becoming functional, or they may actually have something bad going on. So it turns out that some of them can be triggering a failure to recognize non-self, which can get into a mess when you're trying to deal with infectious agents and RNA viruses and all that stuff. In fact, they're specifically going into how RNA virus could exploit this process to slip under the radar and get into the biology because it's not being edited out through this editing process. And lo and behold, it pops up relative to cancers, where it can have both good or bad effects. It can speed up or slow down the process. That shows you what the yin-yangs are going on. It's as all the earmarks of what we would expect from a purely natural biological process that's going on. It doesn't have any design, no intention. So anyway, they were also thinking that there could be properties in this that could be useful in immunotherapy, and that's a perfectly reasonable and understandable thing for them to do. But we're still continuing to see that none of the papers that are on the list so far are buttressing the contention that Luskin was trying to offer it for originally, which is that there are an awful lot of retrotransposons and other air quotes junk DNA sufficient to justify the claim that like 50% or more of the genome is actually functional and they're, in their view, designed. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Jesus Christ. They've got nowhere near that. So far, I found not a single paper that seriously undermines the premise that Danster and Cardinale was doing in his analysis on this point, that you've got a few percentages. When you've got so many millions of examples to play around with, that can lead to lots and lots and lots of examples, but it's still only a few percentage. And you might argue that when the dust settles, that 20% of the junk DNA is actually kind of doing stuff in varying contexts. Sometimes just by being there and interlocking with the genome, and the systems can come in and detect that and tinker around and get rid of it because it's got that easily identifiable ALU. But that's not favoring the design option that Luskin was kind of backing off about. And certainly this is just wildly separate from the anti-evolution position that was being promulgated quite recently, that you would expect functionally all of it to be functional, that in their backyard of their brain, they really don't like the idea that there is not functional parts to the genome. Well, sorry, nature runs that way. Too bad. Get used to it. So let me thank our dear patrons, who I know are in a world where the fact that things are dicey and murky means that I am very, very grateful for everybody that helps out, our colleagues and researchers and assistant researchers and friend level and legacy patrons all the way down the road. I thank you very, very much for everybody that sticks with us week by week, month by month, year by year. And I'm hoping that as many of you as possible can stick with it during the murky times that we are most probably going to be getting in the near future. Anyhow, I'm quite delighted with all the fun and games of material that I have going for Rocks for their Volume 2. As I've said, I'm knee-deep in the cosmology chapter. There's still a lot of material for me to get coordinated for things on the solar system formation and planetary formation and the various eccentricities of why planets are the way they are, and asteroids and comet belts and all that stuff. And then some of the little weird sidebar material that's going to be popping up relative to Kent Hovind and that crowd. One of the little sidebar bits. It's not as if creationists will care. They'll just drop the no junk DNA argument and pretend it never existed. Oh, you're absolutely right. The adaptability of anti-evolutionists to change their position is something which if you live long enough, that you've got direct mutations in the way things operate. Intelligent design hasn't been around all that long, and they're basically hand-waving Darwinism bad, so that they don't really have a model. They don't do systematics. They don't think through the details of paleontology. They're just kind of hand-waving away stuff. So the ones that have actually undergone the most mutation are the young Earth creationists, who have been around longer and have a very fixed ideology that they have to maintain. And the result of that is that they bumped over things that they have to deal with. Their acceptance of plate tectonics and continental drift is a big one. That's occurred all within my lifetime. And then you've got the little hobby horse stuff that goes on at ICR with their rejecting natural selection. That's Randy Guliuz's hobby horse. And also Tim Clary at ICR, his little group of people who are trying to pull the flood boundary down into the Cenozoic rather than the end Cretaceous. They're kind of a little niche bit. But some of the other areas involve the attitude that creationists have about whether the universe is expanding, whether or not relativity theory is correct, whether or not dark matter and dark energy exist. The one who's playing spoil sport constantly here is Danny Faulkner, who's essentially saying, hey, this is like science facts. You're going to have to deal with it. So they've got to come up with something. But in all of this time, you have a little niche thing. You have Russell Humphreys, who a generation ago was coming up with his little cosmological frame, and he's been tweaking with it in various forms. I think it kind of imagines that the universe is all inside of a white hole, and that it can stretch at blinding speed, and the speed of light can vary all over the place. Jason Lyle requires some of that as well. A lot of this is contingent upon the whole day 4 thing that they're bottlenecked into. But we can anticipate things altering. Oh, yes, and a certain amount of speciation, hyperspeciation is functionally a necessity in young Earth creationism, and you can see it bobbing into the surface in some of the displays at the Ark Encounter, even though they don't go out of their way to really declare it. They don't put up a thing that's saying, oh, yeah, we accept hyperspeciation, kids. No, but yet they would have an example of that functionally right in the museum of things like short-necked giraffes and that would have been considered anathema back in the Dwayne Gish era 30 years ago. So it's a fascinating little phenomenon to watch. The breathing tube matter is all of that is the whole theodicy issue, the idea of the creator God making nasty stuff and going out of their way to do so. It's an issue that's still an uncomfortable thing for the believer to deal with. They want to have the pretty cute flowers and the Grand Canyon is so glorious and all that, but they don't really like to deal with the side of things. And it's no coincidence that many people who are coming from a faith-based approach have qualms about that creepy aspect to the nature and universe and come to doubt aspects of their religion or junk it altogether as a result. So there we go. Okie doke. Let's see. Well, we made it into a half an hour, hopefully without anything glitching up. Let me put our little rocks for their commercial. Jason Lau talking about someone dishonest. If he said he went to the zoo, I still wouldn't believe him. Yeah, he's an intriguing character. Lyle was only alluded to peripherally in the first book and in the varying chapters other than the cosmology part, but he crops up more directly in this one because he's part of the heavy guns bit. And the amusing part is how few people there are in that brigade and how kind of in are in trying to deal with subject matter. In some of the topics, you swing over to where they're really not inputting much at all. So what is an intriguing thing about the whole fine-tuning argument is that it's something that isn't really comfortable for young Earth creationists to deal with. And there's only a handful of isolated examples, often below the major guns, who are weighing in on this subject because so much of it's knee-deep in standard cosmology and physics that you can't argue, how fine-tuned a constant is that if it were different over billions of years, we wouldn't have as much carbon. Well, the billions of years is impossible in the young Earth creationist frame, and therefore that argument suddenly loses oomph. So you've got a weird cross current going on when a few of the characters will suddenly turn from an intelligent design version into a young Earth creationist, or they'll be sampling old Earth material, but not really calling attention to that fact. And so they'll be cherry picking things. It's a weird little phenomenon that you go on in this area. But by and large, as a major pursuit, it's a Discovery Institute old Earth creationist obsession. So between Hugh Ross's Reason to Believe and the gang orbiting the Discovery Institute, that's most all of the people who are banging the standard fine-tuning, cosmological fine-tuning, which is relating to fine structure constant and the strength of gravity and all that kind of stuff. A more generic anthropic argument of just I'll perfectly tune this, the planet is in just the right spot and the sun is just perfectly bright and blah, blah, blah. That stuff actually doesn't involve the cosmological constant side of it. And that's been going back in creationism for a long time. And it still continues in young Earth creationism. But the specifically cosmological angle is quite a different kettle of fish. And I think this will be an informative chapter bringing out the players and what the history of it is and how things go up and down and in and out, and relate to some really intriguing little topics, including my little hobby horse, which is mathematics. And why is the universe organized mathematically? And can any gods do it any differently? Maybe not. Anyhow, let's put on our little advert for Rocks for There, Volume 2. Deedly doodly deedly doodly deedly doodly doo. And up, come on, get my little window here to bounce back and forth. One of these days, I got to get a replacement on my little wireless mouse. It died, poor little thing. And advert for the book, Volume 1. And I'm hoping that we'll have another advert that's structured when we get the new book out of the way. Once I finish the cosmology chapter, it's over to adding some material into Jackson's next chapter, which is Noah's Lost Worlds, where it's going to be more on bird evolution and other deep evolutionary issues, as well as the fictitious environment that creationists try to pose for their pre-flood world, but in fact, there's a whole massive material they're never going to make fit. And in terms even of the arrangement of it, the paleoclimates and all that. So there's going to be big sections on whale evolution and big section on the Grand Canyon and the big story that those are telling. The material on the whales is covering a relatively narrow window, about 50 million to 30 million years ago, when the cetaceans are emerging, whereas the Grand Canyon is the ultimate big picture thing that's running from Precambrian times all the way down to the edges of the dinosaur extinction, because Jurassic and Cretaceous are some of the later rocks in the upper level of the Grand Canyon. So most of it is dealing with a much different time. And there's massive stuff about the paleoclimates and things that were going on, even when life was only going on in a bacterial form. So it's a lot of fun stuff there. Then, of course, there's the chapter on the Ark Encounter, and it'll be the first comprehensive laydown of what kinds are supposedly on the Ark according to that operation. They don't go out of their way to bring out the details. And we'll be going into the breakdown of why they're in the order that they are. They're not alphabetical. And so basically they're parasitizing evolutionary material. And then there's even areas of internal contradiction between one creationist and another as to what would constitute a kind or not. And it's a delightful mess, and will become quite clear. That way, anybody that has any scholarly interest in this area will be able to consult our book when they want to know what the hell is at the Ark Encounter, because they've never posted any material other than just a fairly blurry picture of their big chart. I mean, it's there to see in the stupid museum, but they think so little of their audience that it doesn't dawn on them that they need to do a detailed breakdown in like Answers Research Journal or something, or they could easily have all the raw material and things meticulously documented at their website. No, you got Ken Ham blithering on about climate change maybe and trans rights. Yeah, that obsesses them. But they could care less about documenting their own museum. Yeah, that sounds about it. So anyway, that's going to be the material that will be going on. I'm the little anal retentive geek who's responsible to make sure that all the reference link fits together properly. I know there was one goof that I was responsible for in the first book where one of our sources wasn't actually cited anywhere in the book. Turns out to have been one that I forgot to delete properly when we split the thing up into 2 books. Mea culpa. To err is human, but to correct requires sound method. So anyway, make sure everybody is staying super safe. There's still going to be a lot of protests over ice areas. Bear in mind that you want to be peaceful, and that's not necessarily a deterrent to some of the responses in certain areas. They still got to find out whether or not the injunctions that are trying to dislodge the illegal call up of the National Guard in California can be corrected, and this may eventually have to end up in the stupid Supreme Court, and they're technically not on a berth until October for their docket, so they might have to do some immediate, do occasional shadow results in that as well. Although I think amongst even the Trump appointees on the court, Trump's hijinks are beginning to wear pretty thin, because he's running like 95% or so failure rate in courts, including people who are Trump appointees that are going against him. So this is an interesting little mode that's happening in the countryside. Watch out in terms of the economy. We're going to be seeing what the inevitable impact is of millions of undocumented workers who are not able to show up to work and therefore will not be doing their work and won't be replaced by anybody else. This is not merely in the agricultural sector, but in the construction sector. And as I pointed out before, one of the furniture company that's the biggest employer in Marjorie Taylor Greene's home district is heavily dependent on undocumented labor, and they may be in a mess as a result of this. So warnings up on all fronts, kids, and be very careful. Besides worrying about the laser wielding penguins, keep hunkered down. Make sure your finances are as smooth as possible. Make sure you're dealing with for relatives and others that may be in academia or any other areas that could be impacted by draconian attempts to cut the budget and shifts things around and impoundings of things. I mean, it's just a lot of up and down and in and out. So everybody take care. And if this posts properly, then we will be on next week with the next non-Casey Luskin episode. So everybody stay safe and see you next week, kids.